And I think this topic is very important because I see this trend continuing, which should not be surprising. I mean, we are still in a system of white supremacy. I think if you are a white person, clearly, if you're white, you can be gay and practice racism.
Right.
You can be white and a
Right.
feminist and practice racism. So it
Right.
shouldn't be, surprising to anyone. But I
Right.
do see this
You
trend.
can also be black men and practice sexism. I mean, like it goes lots. You can be a black straight man and practice homophobia. Like those things go lots of different directions.
Now, I would point that out to listeners. Now, I think that, I suspect, conscious act of white supremacy. And again, I can reference Dr. Frank B. Wilderson, his program last week, where he said, clearly, black males mistreat black females. It is incorrect. We should be doing everything that we can to stop that misbehavior. However, there is not a structure in place for black males to call on to mistreat black females in mass. That does not exist. That does exist with the system of white supremacy, where white women and or white men, white children, white old people, white geriatrics, they have a system in place that they can pull on to inflict violence on individual and or groups of non-white people. That is in place. And I say it is an act of racism. I suspect conscious. Anytime a white person does that, when the discussion is on white supremacy and they shift off to, well, we want to talk about how black males practice sexism or how black people in general practice homophobia, that you should keep in mind. I think that is a way of slipping the subject off topic, focusing on the problem, racist man, racist woman. Credit Dr. Wilderson on that. He just talked about that last week. I was going to ask, because I think it's very important in seeing how this continues, even to this day. The recent vote in California, 2000, it was the same time the presidential election, 2008, where they were voting on the gay rights issue in California, and they blamed the black people. It didn't pass. The legislation didn't pass. And it was tons of articles where they were coming out and saying it's black people's fault. They're homophobic. They didn't vote for it. They didn't support this. Did you see? You know what I'm talking about, Dr. Segrest?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I don't remember specifics, but yeah, I remember that.
Okay, but
yeah,
do you think that falls in line with what I'm saying? White people continuing to practice?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that there's racism in gay movements. Yep. I think there's racism in women's movements for white people. Yep. As I said before, like I don't think that there's any social movement in this country that if it doesn't consciously deal with race, it won't replicate it. And sometime in the process, as you make frequently the point, that even in the process of that, it's going to replicate it too, right? Social movements are profoundly compromised by questions of race in this country.
Okay. Before I move forward, I do want to get your response. What I said before, you bringing up black males practicing quote unquote sexism. Right. Did what I said, did that make sense? Black males don't have a structure in place to mistreat black females individually and or en masse, and as opposed to white people, they do have a structure in place that they can call on to practice white supremacy against non-white people?
There is clearly a different kind of, there is clearly a structure. I agree, there is clearly a structure, both regional, national, global, that white people draw on to mistreat people of color.
Do you see?
I'm
sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I agree with that. But I also have read and studied a good bit of the writings of black women and feminists about the ways that those issues play out in their lives. And I can reference those writings, but it's probably, I'm not the person to raise those questions because of either because of the need in this conversation to keep the focus on white racism. I'm happy to do that.
Because I think this is important. Are you aware of any material, or just even without material, do you have knowledge of a system in place, structures in place where black males can call on other sources? Like if I'm a black male, so can I call the police? I want to harm a black female. Can I call them and concoct a story, and they'll just believe it, and they will proceed to harm a black female or groups of black females? Is there an institution in place where I have structures and other people that I can call on to help me mistreat black females? Do you know of that to be in existence?
No.
Thank you.
Cases says the human immunodeficiency virus, or HIV, is a disease which may lead to serious health consequences. People who test positive for HIV may or may not contract acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, or AIDS, a debilitating and often fatal disease. In Jacksonville, the rate of new HIV cases in the black population is 5.5 times the rate of the white population, and the numbers are growing. The new HIV cases per 100,000 population in the black, amongst the black population in Jacksonville for 2008 was 93.7 per 100,000. It jumped in 2009 to 115.2 per 100,000. That is a gain of 21.5. The white population, the 2009 numbers, 17.2 per 100,000. Just to give you that again so you can hold those stats. 2009, the number of new HIV cases per 100,000 in the white population is 17.2. The number of new HIV cases per 100,000 in the black population is 115.2. Do you have any explanation for what that gargantuan difference is?
Well, I think we could use the R word for sure. I think it is around racism, buried right there in the structure of the laws that help to create the racism that's there, and also the whole issue of homophobia, and not having the internalized oppression that goes on, so that folks don't have the courage to come out in this heteronormative world. So that's where I would lay at the feet of racism and heterosexism.
Okay, now the second one, when you say homophobia, what specifically about homophobia and black people do you think is a part of why these numbers are so widely disproportionate between the number of new HIV cases between white people, the number of new HIV cases between black people? Is there something about black people that they're just way more quote-unquote homophobic than white people?
No, I'm not saying that they're more homophobic. I am saying, from what I've learned as I've done work around this issue in the community, that the African American church seems to hold really strongly to their belief that homosexuality is a sin, which makes it more difficult for someone who is gay or lesbian or bisexual to come out and to be protected and have themselves protected against AIDS.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat it back just to make sure that I'm understanding you correctly. You're saying, according to your understanding, the black church, their teachings make it difficult for a black person who says he or she is gay, lesbian, whatever the case may be, make it difficult for that person to feel safe, accepted, to be able to come out, be comfortable with themselves, to get tested, to see if they have any sort of problem. And because of this, it is contributing to the wide disparity between the number of new HIV cases between black people and white people. Did I understand you correctly?
I am saying that is a possibility, and that as I understand from talking to African American LGBT folks, that it's very difficult to be LGBT in the black community. And I know it's also true in the white community. I'm not saying that it's not true in the white community. Okay. But I do know that's an issue.
Okay. This is massive. This is like
it
almost, is. 17.2 to 115.2.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing.
We've had Scott Lively on this program. This is a white male evangelical minister. He's gone around the world, even to Uganda, saying that homosexuality is bad. This is not supposed to be. There are tons of white people. I see them all the time. You just had a white guy at Firefox who just had to step down because he spoke out against this. The white male who is the
I'm
owner
not,
of the Chick-fil-A franchise. It's tons of white people who use the Bible and have this same view. So how is
totally.
it that this would be a massive problem for black people but not for white people?
Now, I didn't say anything about it wasn't a massive problem. I'm just saying I'm basing my experience in working through the human rights ordinance here, trying to add LGBT, that the young people I talk to, that it is a real problem in our community, in the black community. I'm basing it on that, so it's more anecdotal information. I don't have any statistical information to back it up, and probably should not have even spoken because it is just anecdotal.
Okay. That's I definitely put a red flag on that one. Anytime this sort of information comes out, and particularly if that's, a part of your justification, even though you said it's anecdotal and, maybe you shouldn't have spoken, that is alarming, in my opinion. And I would say it is highly suspicious, just that's given as part of the justification. But I could be incorrect, in my understanding as well.
I've been very upfront about this. I do not think it is correct. In my opinion, it's Margaret Sanger. It's negative eugenics. It is promoting zero population, particularly when I see well-funded white people. And you said earlier that there are a lot of black people, black and non-white people, who are homosexual, queer, lesbian, who have done a lot of work promoting gay rights and have been mistreated and have had a difficult time. All of that is true. I'm very aware that it has not been the behavior of white people to find black people who are struggling and trying to improve their situation. The pattern has not been for white people to seek these folks out, promote them, help them out, join their cause. That has not been the pattern. The pattern has been COINTELPRO. You're going to jail forever, or you're going to die. You will be serious consequences for attempting to organize and improve things for black people and non-white people. So it is extremely, to me, it's extremely suspicious. Now, I would not say
But the question that I asked you.
I'm getting to it.
Okay.
I don't think I'm not in favor of killing any non-white people. I'm not in favor of going out to kill someone because they are gay.
Well, these could be black people too, though. These people in Uganda are probably not white people. These are probably black people who can be picked up, jailed, and possibly executed for same-sex sex. So we're talking about black on black here, right?
And that's I was saying I'm not in support of going to kill.
Well, I'm glad to hear
white
you.
or non-white for participating in so-called homosexual behavior. I'm certainly not going out to kill anybody because they're participating in that behavior. I'm very clear. I do not think it's correct. I'm very clear about that for many reasons. I do not think it is an improvement. I speak against it whenever I have the opportunity, but I do not think they should be killed. I'm not going out to beat up anybody because they participate in that behavior, white or non-white. So it would apply to black people anywhere in the world. I would not support killing them or, saying they should be beaten up. I would need to get more information about all the intricacies of the law to see more of the details about it, because I think it said some of those penalties were for if one of the participants was underage and was infected with HIV. Some of that I would have to kind of see what they're talking. And I think some of it also was about forced sexual intercourse, which is something that's not what we're talking about. So
that's right.
Yeah, that's something different entirely. But yeah, like I said, I'm very clear. I do not think the behavior is correct. I don't think I'm not in support of it, and I'm especially suspicious about white people promoting this behavior, promoting non-white people who support this behavior. In fact, I've even heard from non-white people who said they were treated better by white people because they participated in that behavior. I heard that from Little Richard said that he was treated better when he acted effeminate. I've heard that repeatedly from non-white people. That is another reason why I'm suspicious of it.
E-Train?
Yeah, so I had another question. It's kind of a piggyback off of this, and it's kind of based on your research. So number one, as Vic has already pointed out, there are a lot of black people in front of the LGBT movement is sort of mascot, in my opinion. And then there are also, the dominant narrative also seems to insinuate that black people are the most so-called anti-gay as well.
Right.
So the first question is, how can that be? How can the dominant narrative basically push that huge contradiction? And then the second thing is, based on your research with organizations that you pointed out that may participate in their behavior, could you juxtapose their political alignment with LGBTQ issues to, the homophobic black people? Could you juxtapose like their two political orientations towards?
Right. Yeah. Well, with respect to the first question about, how do you reconcile what might be a contradiction between this narrative that that black people are especially homophobic, with the visibility of black people at the forefront of the LGBT movement. I mean, I don't think anyone thinks that because I don't think anyone who believes that the black community is especially homophobic believes that means there are no black LGBT people. I think the story goes something like, well, let me be clear. I'm highly suspicious of the narrative that the black community is more homophobic than any other racial ethnic group. I mean, I'm somebody who, I teach queer studies courses, and I teach at a quite racially diverse public university in Southern California. White students are not the majority at that university, and there's a large Latino, Asian population and a smaller black population. But what is interesting to me is that students come into my office hours and say, "Oh, Professor Ward, I'm gay, but my family is Chinese, and so they are so homophobic. They're the most homophobic." And then I'll have a student comes in and says, I'm Egyptian American, and my family is Muslim, and so of course they're like the most homophobic, and so they, I cannot come out to them. And then I have white Mormon kid who comes in and says, my family is the most homophobic. And then I have, a black student who comes in and says, well, of course, my family's homophobic. I mean, I think all families are homophobic. There is no racial ethnic group or country anywhere in the world where little children are taught, what's great, being queer. That just doesn't happen. We all come from homophobia, and homophobia manifests in culturally specific and racially specific ways. A lot of attention has been paid to the ways that it manifests in the black community. But again, I think that's racism, that so much of the focus is there. What are the racialized ways that it manifests in white families? I think that's an important question to ask. So I think this narrative about how black community is more homophobic, I think people who believe that sort of think that that's why someone like Laverne Cox is a little more special, because she has triumphed over, those restrictions within the black world, and so all the more reason to put her up, to make her especially visible. So that, I think, that's the belief. And then, if I understood your second question correctly, I think what you're saying is, we're looking at these very powerful institutions like the United States military, which is controlled by white men almost exclusively, and here we see these very homophobic but also homosexualized kinds of behavior that happen in in that institution, and then at the same time, black people or the black church is being called out as the site of homophobia. So if I'm getting, what you were implying, it would be absolutely, I think, very productive to turn that lens back on mainstream institutions that, even as they claim to be increasingly pro-gay inclusion, like the military, that it's very slow to change the way that homophobia has been part of the culture of part of the culture of male bonding, part of the culture of relating to the enemy, torturing the enemy. And we saw that very clearly with Abu Ghraib, that one of the ways that you can humiliate the enemy is by putting them in situations where they're made to be, made to appear like fags. And so, it's just like if you said, oh, well, there's no sexism in the military because women are now in the military. Well, if you've seen the documentary The Invisible War, you know that the military is an incredibly unsafe place for women. And as you pointed out, also for men. It's just incredibly sexually, it's a kind of hotbed of sexual assault. So, I think that's how I would think about that.
I looked at the whole controversy in North Carolina, the HB2 bill about, policing bathrooms and what have you. There was not one black person in the North Carolina legislature that sponsored that bill, signed off on anything. I didn't hear anybody go after white people and say that, white people are exclusively in North Carolina. They are really bigoted and homophobic. It did not get any people that opposed what they did. It did not get cast in racial terms in identifying these people as white. And then going after attacking them on that basis. Do you have any theories as to why this is being done, and on a global scale where black people are being chided and admonished as being the biggest homophobes on the planet?
Well, I think it goes well beyond homophobia. The misdeeds of white people always get to be written off as a individual, mental illness. The guy in Charleston, right? He was mentally ill when he specifically targeted African Americans to kill in a church. He is not a product of white supremacy. He was individually mentally ill. And the fact that, the vast majority of mass shootings are white men, in the media reports, they're always individual loners who have somehow gone wrong, violent history of mental illness. So also scapegoating of people with mental illness, of course, but it's always an individual act and not a product of white supremacy and patriarchy. Whereas, somehow all black people across the globe get lumped in together, and they never act alone, right? The North Carolina, and the some of the people that I have seen give the most eloquent speeches against the North Carolina bill have been African American. This whole notion of universal black homophobia is, it just flies in the face of history. It writes out people like Bayard Rustin, who was one of the first, out gay men activists, and basically running the civil rights movement in the 1960s. Was he punished for being an out black gay man? Sure, but it wasn't just by black people by any means, and nor did he ever turn his back on the black community because of it.
Okay. Right on. You said 2 questions. Did you have time? I just wanted to get in one quick comment to get your response before you part ways. Okay. With the shooting incident in Orlando that we talked about before, and even the conversation we were talking about Peter Liang, you mentioned identity politics and how sometimes that can obfuscate and lead us astray from trying to replace white supremacy with justice. At least one of the things, one of the thoughts that I have about this shooting in Orlando, and even broader, there is no group that I have seen that does a better job, or I'll say it this way, there are few groups that do a better job at identity politics, quote unquote, than the LGBT community, which is largely dominated by white people that I suspect are practicing racism, where they are able to do a fantastic job of portraying themselves as victims. Even though these are many white people, I strongly think that they are practicing racism and not addressing how non-white people who are in this community, LGBT community, how they are victims of white supremacy, and how even white gays or white transgenders or white queers, how they also are practicing white supremacy. I think a lot of times that gets obscured in my view. Even when it does get brought up, in my view, the black people that are LGBTQ, their most dominant problem is not the fact that they're gay or queer or transgender. The most dominant problem in terms of why they are vulnerable is white supremacy. If they were black, even if they were not queer, they would still be vulnerable because of racism. Even if they were not transgender, they would still be vulnerable because of racism. If they were white, even if they were queer or whatever the case may be, a lot of their problems would not exist anymore. They would be in a much better position in the worldwide, wherever they happen to be, just being a white person in the system of white supremacy. That is a major problem that I have with all of this in terms of how this generally gets presented in terms of identity politics. In my view, nobody does it better than the white-dominated LGBT community. What would your response to that be?
I mean, that is very true. I think that's how the structure works. And so what I talk about, when I was mentioning earlier, of course Hillary's going to do whatever it'll take for her to be in the role of as actually a strong presidential candidate. It's because she's stepping on all other people, other women of color, with black women who have ran in the past, Latino women who have ran in the past, to be where she is, to be closer to that structure, closer to the white man. And so when we talk about what you just raised, it's the same thing. It's the same thing of white gays doing whatever it can to just be closer to the top. And I think in a lot of the organizing in our cities, in our organizations, we recognize and we recognize and see that it's particular people who are impacted by the violence against queer and trans people. And particularly in New York City, there's I think 23 black trans women who were killed and nothing's being done in those cases. Being very specific and clear that we support C.O.W.S as an organization and people in the movement need to make sure that we continue to acknowledge that, and that their voices are on the forefront, because our voices is all that we have, and we got to uplift those voices who are most directly impacted by this whole tragedy, and we have to that's our responsibility when we talk about Asian Americans being responsible. For what people are doing. We have the collective responsibility for collective liberation. We as allies, or we as people who don't feel that we're more directly impacted by what happened, is to elevate those voices, to make sure that their voices come before the mainstream LGBT narrative that's coming out, that's whitewashed.
And also, in regards to the, the shooting in Florida, it's coming out now that the shooter was gay himself. So I just find it very interesting that white supremacist news media is going down the line of Islamophobia and terrorism, when he's basically, and they had talked to people he went to school with in college who said he was all over gay bars with them. Actually, the place that he shot up, there were people there that knew him. Some of the security guards said that he had come there before. So essentially, this was a gay on gay violence, if there's any better way of putting it, because he was basically a homosexual male that I believe probably couldn't accept his homosexuality, or was angry about being homosexual, and took it out on other homosexuals. And like you said, I find it very telling too that the vast majority of people that were shot were so-called Latinos, non-white people, and no one is focusing on that. Everyone is focusing on the gay issue. And the last thing I wanted to say is the difference to me between black males who are homosexual today and black males who were homosexual, let's say, in the 60s, and I'll give a great example, James Baldwin. He never put his sexuality above his race because he understood that his issue with this in this country had to do with him being black, not being homosexual. And I think it's the reverse is true today. A lot of black people and other non-whites have been indoctrinated into the sexuality issue instead of understanding that if a cop guns you down, it's because you're a black person. They don't see that you're gay. They see that you're a nigger, and that's what they're killing you for. And thank you for taking my call, Gus. I'll mute my line.